when I was a little boy, I remember playing on the floor, a lot of grown people in the room. And if somebody mentioned the name Leo Frank, there were people who got up and walked out of the room.
The Broadway Maven was recently privileged to have a visit by Alfred Uhry, the book writer for Parade. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Our guest today is an accomplished author and playwright. He has won an Oscar, 2 Tonys, and a Pulitzer Prize. Within his long and accomplished career, the part that interests us most today is his Atlanta trilogy, the first part of which was Driving Miss Daisy, about an elderly Southern Jewish woman and her Black chauffeur. Part 2 is the play The Last Night of Ballyhoo, and then there's today's show, Parade. Welcome, Mr. Uhry.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Great to have you here. So I'm going to read you a question that I wrote, and then I did some more research and realized how my question is a little off. I'm trying to get a sense of just how present this story was in the lives of Southern Jews. How familiar would Miss Daisy have been with the Leo Frank case, for example? And then I did some reading and I realized that Lucille Frank and Miss Daisy, your grandmother, were friends.
That's true. So she would have been more than very acquainted with it.
Right, but this is a case that was really present in the lives or through the end of the century, even today in Atlanta. To what extent?
I can't quite speak for today, but certainly in the years I was growing up in Atlanta in the 40s and 50s, it was ominously present all the time.
For example?
Well, the odd thing about my particular brand of German Judaism was they had been there for a long time, long time, and they considered themselves better than the other Jews that came later, which we won't go into now. But that was very prevalent. So not only was they horrified at what happened to one of theirs, they were triply horrified that they were just considered to be regular old Jews like anybody else. That really stung hard. And when I was a little boy, I remember playing on the floor, a lot of grown people in the room. And if somebody mentioned the name Leo Frank, there were people who got up and walked out of the room.
More Parade in 10 seconds, but first, the Broadway Maven offers a free online class every Monday at noon and 8 p.m. Visit thebroadwaymaven.com for details. You mentioned North-South. Do you think, and I'm talking either about the character or the historical figure, if Leo Frank had been a Southern Jew, do you think it could have unfolded the same way, or is his northernness an important part of the story?
Well, in our version, Leo Frank was and really was a northern. He was born in Brooklyn and was a northern boy. But in our version, yes, he was a poster boy for a bad Jew, and he kind of looked kind of creepy. He had big glasses, and there was something sort of Woody Allenish about the way he looked. And yes, it contributed greatly. He also didn't understand the South. He didn't understand what people thought and how people were.
Right.
And he didn't know how to blend in, and none of that spoke well for him.
So the most powerful moment, not counting the last 10 minutes of the show, but I'm talking about when Mary Fagan's mother ends her testimony when she says, "And so I forgive you, Jew." I'm wondering, did that come from you, or does that come from Mr. Brown, or how did that? Was that both of you?
That came from Jason. You got to keep in mind, Jason was at the time 24 years old, and I don't think he'd ever been. Maybe he flew over Georgia when he went from New York to Miami, but he didn't know anything much about the South. And for 6 months, he just listened to me talk about the South and what I grew up in, and he really listened. And he's a talented man.
Yes.
And no, that came out of him.
Well, it's
the first time I was floored by it because it's so good.
I've seen the show a few times, once way back when it was first touring, and then a few times in preparation for this class. And, it's sometimes not sung, it's just spit, or it's just, and it's shocking. It really comes out of nowhere because that there's anti-Semitism, but it's so raw at that moment. I think it's just a terrific moment. And that's great that he was able to do that.
Yeah, yes, I was very lucky to get him.
Yeah.
Originally, Hal
So
Prince had given it to Stephen Sondheim,
yeah,
and Steve was going to do it, and I was floored by that. And
yes,
then he decided he'd already written a very unhappy show called Passion, and he
right.
didn't want to do another one. So Hal thought, what would you think if I got a 24-year-old boy who's never written a Broadway show? And I thought, oh boy,
Yeah,
look how lucky I was.
yeah. Oh wow. You mentioned that it ends poorly. A year before your show, Titanic came out, and there's another show that everybody knows at the beginning how it's going to end. And I'm wondering, do you see commonalities between your show and other shows that have sort of a tragedy at the end that people see coming, or is it really a different kind of show? Would you say?
I think Parade's an animal unto itself,
Yeah.
its own rules. We just did research in my own. I didn't have to do much research because I kind of lived through it all. I
Right.
mean, well, not lived through it then. I was not born for 20 years after it happened.
Right.
But no, we just followed our own guidance. Hal Prince was a wonderful director and
Yeah.
a leader in certain ways. It all worked well.
I'm going to tell you a stereotype, but there's something to it, which is at Jewish camp, every summer you either do Fiddler and then you rotate with Joseph. That's the stereotype, right? And if I was running a Jewish camp, I would work Parade into the rotation, and then the moment it becomes available, I would stick in the band's visit, right? I'm wondering, do you know, are Jewish day schools or Jewish camps, are they doing Parade, or is it more
I
community?
do know that I don't know if they're Jewish high schools, but I know that high schools, if they do Assassins, then they usually do Parade, which is very daring. My high school wouldn't have done back in the 50s in Georgia, wouldn't have done anything like that. They
Yeah,
barely would do HMS Pinafore. So this is a step up.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm delighted. Parade has done a lot in colleges and it's done in regionals. And
To see those productions,
I never go.
you never go. How come?
No, I'm too nervous.
You know, we talked, we had Mark Shaman was here,
Oh
and
yeah,
he's talking about Hairspray, and for him, going to see Hairspray in high schools is really exciting because he wrote a story with a part for the gay kid and a part for the fat girl,
I
right?
would go. I would go to a high school. If
You
I ever
would-
gotten to see it in a high school, I'd probably go.
you probably would.
Oh yeah, I'd love to see that. It's just these semi-professional things that are very noble, and I remember when I wrote Miss Daisy,
Uh-huh.
and my agent said, "Let me tell you something. If you go to one production, you're going to have to go to them all. And if
Right.
you say thank you so much, I just find it better for me if I don't attend. I'm
Uh-huh.
very honored that you asked me, and that's pretty much what I've stuck to all my life."
That makes sense. There's something else I've been trying to figure out, which is a key moment in the show when Leo Frank is about to be lynched, and they say, "Do you have anything you want to say?" And he says the Shema, but he says it to the tune of the Old Red Hills of Home. And if and I'm trying to figure out what that is, because it might represent that he's fused his Jewish and his Southern identities because he sings his Jewish song to a Southern tune, but that doesn't seem to make sense related to the rest of the plot. He's not fusing his identities. Why is he choosing to sing the Shema that way?
You're going to have to ask Jason.
Okay. Okay.
I think it's very theatrical, and I always just bought it, so it never was really any decision of mine, but it works. So I just kept my mouth shut.
Very powerful.
The Civil War is an example of occupied. It's the only part of America that's ever really been occupied by other Americans, and I think that was a big reason for the tragedy of the Leo Frank case, because in many cases, I know that Mary Fagan's father went off to fight the war and came home crippled,
Mhm.
and he lost his farm in Alabama. And he couldn't make a living. So they moved all the family with the children to Atlanta. And the children had to leave school and go to work. And Mary was working, what was it, $7 a week or $1? It was less than that. Putting erasures on the back of pencils. And not only that, they were defeated. The glorious cause was defeated, whether you believed in the cause or not.
Right.
They believed in it, and it was a tragedy all the way around. The Civil War. Of course, in the South, when I was growing up, we call it the Civil War. I mean, that wasn't allowed. It was the war between the states because there was nothing civil about it, they said.
Mm-hmm. So 2 weeks from now, we're having Winnie Holzman. She's going to talk about Wicked. And so we've talked to a lot of book writers, and I'm trying to figure out, is there a community of people who write the scripts for Broadway shows? Do you guys know each other? How do you get trained to do what you do? Yeah.
John Weidman is a very good friend of mine.
Uh-huh.
I don't know Winnie Holzman, but I admire her work. She's younger than I am too. So, I mean, I used to know all these people from going to the Dramatists Guild council meetings.
Right.
I think I started out being a lyric writer, and that's what I wanted to be. And I gradually understood two things. One, that no matter what I did, I was never going to be as good as Steve Sondheim. And two, my real interest turned out to be playwriting and book writing. So I just moved that way, and this was a good thing that happened to me.
Well, it's a big success. I happen to love Parade, and while we were waiting for class to start, several people talked about how it's one of their favorite shows. So you've got a great crowd here, which is a good segue for me to invite student questions, if that's all right with you.
Oh, please, here I am.
Why is the title Parade?
Because it's all about the Memorial Day parade and the parade of injustice that swept through Georgia. It was Hal Prince's title, and I thought it was great, so I kept it. I wanted it. At first, Hal wanted to call it I Love a Parade, and I thought that's sort of sassy. And it cut down to Parade. I think Parade's a very good generic title for it. I'm very pleased. I never could have thought of it.
Yes, you talked about an Atlanta cycle of plays. Can you kind of describe the interrelationship between Driving Miss Daisy and your other play and Parade, and how they relate to each other in terms of giving a picture of Southern life and a picture of Atlanta?
Yeah, well, they aren't a trilogy at all. They're just three things that I wrote, and people started calling it that. I grew up in what I now understand was a very specialized way with Jews who wanted to be Southern more than they wanted to be Jews. And that was just the way that it was. And I wanted to explore that because all my adult life I've lived in New York, and I've come to understand that doing things like celebrating Jewish holidays is a good thing and not something to be ashamed of. When I was a child, it was never said to me, but it was sort of, okay, we're Jewish, and it's a little bit like being lame, and you have to deal with it. And don't try to pretend you're not, just go ahead. And let's have Christmas trees, and let's have Easter egg hunts, and never mind all the rest, which is a pretty screwed up way to grow up, especially when you look like I look.
What was the audience reaction to these, especially I know when I heard her yell Jew, I got chills. And this is an unusual musical. I was wondering back when it was first produced, what the reaction was of the audience and the world to this play.
Well,
musical.
The first time we did Parade, we never had an out of town production. We opened cold at Lincoln Center with a couple of previews, and we had some walkouts. And we got not very good reviews at the Times. And it ran about 3 or 4 months. And then we had the extraordinary opportunity to do it 9 years later in London at a very small theater with a cut down cast. It was the Donmar Playhouse. And we had the chance, Jason and me, to look at it and do some, I would say, change about 15%, write some new songs and
Wow.
cut it down. And after that, it was just bingo all the way.
Good.
People took it for what it is, a history lesson. And I guess because it was in England, that got wonderful reviews all the way around. And we've only now let people do that version. And every time it's been here that I know of, it's done well. So I
Terrific.
don't know what.
We did a production of this in Des Moines about 10, 12 years ago. And that was my first introduction into this part of history. And in doing other research for this class, I was surprised to find out that this was the, where's my notes? The only known lynching of a Jew in America. Now, I'm familiar with lynchings and the Ku Klux Klan and everything from the African-American side, but I was surprised to find this out about Leo Frank and his part in the history of America from that. Have you had any other feedback about that aspect of it?
I learned that too, Donna, when we did the show. I didn't really know that. And I was horrified, and also more horrified now to realize what Black people have been going through for 400 years. And we just kind of let it pass. Oh yeah, okay.
Arguably, this case is only important, is only well known because it's so rare, right? It was the only lynching of a Jew. And if you compare that to the African-American experience in the South or the Jewish experience in Eastern Europe, you get a very different picture. But
Yeah.
American Jewish history is different. Go ahead.
I think that's what I wanted to suggest in Parade, that Jews who thought they were so well settled, like Lucille Frank in Georgia, and really part of Georgia. I mean, she says, I'm a Georgia girl. I'm always going to be a Georgia girl. And to be knocked on their pins by this, yeah, you're not so Georgia. You're just like, I won't say the N word, but you're not much different than that.
Right.
And took a long time to sort of get over that. It was I think, except for Hugh Dorsey, who was the prosecutor who became the governor, and Tom Watson, who wrote the newspaper horrible articles and became a senator, everybody else involved in the story, the white people, the Black people, everybody was a victim. And the other shocking thing about Parade was we never really said who killed Mary Fagan, but it was pretty clear. We're just 99% sure that it was that Black man who worked in the factory. But I'm pretty sure he was drunk and all he wanted was money. But I didn't want to duck away from that. None of us did. And I think I got by that by deciding that he was the smartest person in the whole show. And he was a sociopath. And I don't blame him.
If you know, your show has that moment at the beginning where he meets Mary Fagan, and then there's this moment she wants to say something, and then it goes silent. And at the end, we find out what she wanted to say was Happy Memorial Day, meaning Confederate Memorial Day, right?
Right.
Now that's somebody who doesn't know the story might think that we're supposed to wonder, did he actually kill her or not? That's not what you were trying to do.
Well, there is one thing, David, that is undeniable. That afternoon of the day of the murder, Leo Frank went home for lunch. And the only time in the history of his being the manager of the pencil factory, he called the office, he called the factory, I think 2 times to see if everything was all right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if there hadn't been that teeny tiny little hair hanging down in the whole thing, I probably wouldn't have written it. Because
So you're not 100%.
We almost know he didn't do it.
Almost. Okay, that's interesting. I did not Did not know that.
There were so many players in this case, from, the Pinkerton Guards to the New York Times to the KKK. How did you, and then major figures like Tom Watson and Hugh Dorsey and Governor Slayton, how did you winnow down the outside influences? It's just such a huge story and so many players.
That's a very good question, Alicia, and it was the hardest thing about it. And I just kept, and I had good helpers. I had Jason, I had Hal, and we just kept thinking, okay, what's the story we want to tell? And the more and more I wanted to tell the story, the more I knew that seeing actors on a stage and hearing them talk and sing, I wanted to focus on the marriage of Lucille and Leo. I actually, when I was a little boy, my grandmother played cards with Lucille Frank, but I was a little boy, and your grandmother's friends are just other spooky old ladies, I guess. I didn't really, I didn't take much notice, but I remember her. And I remember that she worked in a clothing store, a ladies' clothes store. She was what they called the vendeuse. She was the lady who welcomed the rich ladies at the store and got the clothes. And she always was known as Mrs. Leo Frank. And my grandmother always said that was a sign of pride. And I just was fascinated by the story from the time I was 10 or 11 years old. And there were questions that nobody would answer. But yes, it was very hard, because once you start with the FBI and the Pinkertons and the whole thing, you just drown. You can't do all that. So I just cut way down.
So I am shifting to gallery view so we can all give a round of applause for Mr. Uhry. Thank you so much for joining us. Really interesting, and what a great show. So grateful that you've gifted us this great little piece of musical theater. Thanks so much.
I'll tell you what, it was, although it was a horrific story, it was a lot of fun to work on it. We had a wonderful moving time when we did it. We were all I'm very proud of Parade, more than I think of anything else.
Wonderful. Great to hear. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
My first Patreon supporter will be recognized in a future video. And here's another video I think you'll like.